The biggest problem is knowing you're in a multiple target engagement. I must have been on the street about a week when I walked up on my first group of suspects. They didn't stand three people in line. As I walked up, the first thing they did is they spread out. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, wait a minute, this isn't the way this is supposed to go. Nobody taught me anything about this. So you know what? I backed up so I could keep them in my field of view without having to turn my head and watch each one of them.
Welcome to Aimpoint's Taking Aim podcast. I'm your host, Rich Nance. Here we'll take a deep dive into firearms culture and the Second Amendment lifestyle. From hunters to veterans, competitive shooters, police officers, tactical trainers, 2A advocates, and even some well-known celebrities, we'll cover it all. Today we're sitting down with Dave Spaulding of Handgun Combatives. He was a gun writer, he was a cop for 36 years. He knows what he's talking about. This is going to be a very interesting episode. We're going to talk about red dots, so stay tuned. Good morning, Dave. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Rich. I really appreciate it. This is a kind of a new venture for you. I hope it works out really well.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun so far, Dave. Hey, so what I'd like to do, Dave, is obviously we've known each other for about 15 years. You've been a mentor to me as far as all things shooting. But people that may not be familiar with you, or they may only know you as the founder of Handgun Combatives, let's say, give them a little taste of your background. And I know you worked with Montgomery County Sheriff's Office there in Ohio for 30-something years. Tell us a little bit about that and how that evolved into you starting your own training business.
Well, I initially went to college, wanted to be a track and field coach. I went to college on a track scholarship. And, you know, when this collegiate athlete, when it comes to an end, they want to continue it on. So coaching is obvious. So I got a degree in secondary education with a minor in sports physiology. I went on a ride with my future stepfather-in-law. He was a deputy at the department I ended up going on, and I got bit bad by the cop bug. And so I abandoned all that thoughts for education and ended up going into law enforcement. I spent 28 years at that sheriff's office, had a wide variety of assignments. Everything from dispatching cars and working the jail floors to patrol, evidence collection, investigation, SWAT, training. I was the commander of a multi-jurisdictional drug task force that literally ran cases from Miami to Seattle, all across the nation.
Yeah, I've seen some great photos of you with a mullet, and definitely deserve to be looked at if people haven't checked those out.
That wasn't the narcotics task force. That was when I was working in that surveillance unit. We were targeting career criminals. The thought at the time was that there was a small number of criminals that were responsible for a sizable number of the criminal acts. So we basically followed them everywhere and tried to catch them committing crimes in progress. And that was a lot of fun. There was a lot of activity there. So it was a good assignment. But that's when I had the mullet and the beard and all that stuff.
So as far as firearms, were you always interested in firearms, or did that come as a byproduct of being a police officer?
Well, I was interested in firearms as a child. There was a television show on the 60s called The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And they took a Walther P38 and added accessories to it. And you could shoot helicopters down with it. So as a 9-10-year-old boy, I thought that was pretty neat. But through high school and college, it kind of went away, and it returned when I went into law enforcement. I was on the department about 3 years. About 1980, we formed our first SWAT team. It's still in operation. I was one of the first members for that. And because of that unit, that SWAT unit, we felt like we needed our own trainer, our own firearms instructor. So they sent me off to the journey in Ohio. It's a number of classes. You have to do a week of revolver, a week of pistol, a week of assault rifle / subgun, 3 days of shotgun, because nobody wants to shoot a shotgun for a week. And then, precision rifle. Then you had to take a week of instructional skills and all that kind of stuff. So to be a firearms instructor in Ohio was a long journey.
That's kind of a cool way to do it, Dave. In California, we would have to go to a different school for each discipline. Like if you wanted to be a patrol rifle instructor, that's its own school. If you wanted to be a handgun instructor, that's its own school. So it can become quite cumbersome to send people to all these schools. That seems like a pretty logical way to do it. Plus, you're giving the guy a wide knowledge base right from the get. So I do like that approach.
The way they scheduled it, the State Training Academy, which is where you went for that. It was about a year and a half or 2 year undertaking. If you just went every time they offered it,
sure.
It could take longer than that. But I went through all of that stuff, and then I really got interested in it. So I started taking some of the private classes. Going to Gun Sight, taking classes from Ken Hackathorn or John Farnham or Masada Ayub and those folks. So I got kind of bit by the bug, and it. Still going to this day.
Dave, talk a little bit about how handgun instruction changed from the time when you started in the academy to like what the type of things that you and I are teaching these days.
Initially, when I went into the academy in 1976, it was very target focused. And I mean like marksmanship focused. The entire 40-hour block of instruction was directed at passing the practical pistol course, which was a set stage of fire. It went from 5 to 60 yards. You shot from the hip at 5 yards, and then at 25 yards, you did a barricade shoot. Now, that didn't mean use of cover. You put your hand on the barricade, you laid your gun into the web of your hand, and you fired your 6 rounds. At 50 yards, you did a braced kneeling. At 60 yards, you laid on the ground. And it was all marksmanship related. Probably as we got into the early 80s, the FBI made a change in doctrine. They started what was called the tactical pistol course, and it was intended to be more gunfight oriented. And things changed along those way. In the state of Ohio, Jeff Cooper had a big influence. I started out in more of a point shooting kind of a situation, and then it suddenly changed over to the modern technique of the pistol with the hard weaver. And then probably into the late 80s, around 1990, John Shaw and the Mid-South Institute for Self-Defense Shooting, where many of our military special operators go for training, started that hard locked in isosceles where you had a lot of body weight in behind it and you were shooting real fast and all of that kind of stuff. So it's been quite a transition for me, because I started out point shooting, had to go to the weaver stance, had to go to a hard isosceles, and now I'm actually into kind of a mixture of all of them.
I think you're absolutely right, Dave. I came on when it was the hard weaver was what we were being taught in law enforcement. And I thought that was the way to go. That was how you shoot. That was the right way. But, then the more I learned, the more I realized there is no right way. And you just got to figure out what works for you. I have, I think, kind of similar to you, sort of a hybrid stance where our hips and shoulders are pretty much aligned with the target. I like to keep my back foot further back than most people. Like an isosceles, a true isosceles offers no front to back stability. So for me, that's out, because I focus a lot on close quarter pistol stuff, as you know. So you got to find what works and what's balanced and where you can fight from, where you can move from, because your shooting stance better be the same as your fighting stance. It's not two different things.
You can't get so fixed into a position to control recoil that it doesn't allow you to move quickly. The thought of having your foot back slightly is sound, because you know what a bipod versus a tripod is. That tripod, that leg to the rear, is what keeps everything from falling over. So having your feet planted side by side would be much like the bipod, but putting that foot back, keeping that body square, is more like the tripod, and that allows you to stay into it. But also by having those feet offset, it allows you to take that rapid step in either direction, or move forward or back.
Absolutely.
So it has to be, and of course it's called a fighting stance. That seems to be the generally accepted term, based on hand-to-hand combat type fighting and all that kind of stuff. But let's be honest, Rich, it's not exactly the same for any of us.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be. It should be based on your physicality, maybe age. Maybe you have something that prohibits you from extending your arms in a certain way. You just got to modify it and find what works for you. That's absolutely sound. Dave, talk a little bit about how your law enforcement career, you retired as a lieutenant. I think you got into some sort of like court security stuff for a while, if I'm not mistaken. And then that led to you developing Handgun Combatives, which you and I talked about the time that you were developing that. And I remember you telling me, well, I'd like to teach maybe a class every one weekend a month. Well, that turned into 3 or 4 weekends a month for the good part of a decade with you traveling all around. And I know at the end you got to hate the travel, but I think you did a lot of good. And talk a little bit about how you went from retiring as a police lieutenant with Montgomery County Sheriff's Office to your next venture, which was the court stuff and eventually Handgun Combatives.
Well, Handgun Combatives was actually a long time coming. And it was based on the things that I had seen and heard in my law enforcement career. You've heard this story before, Rich, but maybe your listeners haven't. When I went into the academy in 1976, and we shot the tactic or the practical pistol course, it didn't seem much to me like gunfighting. I mean, I didn't really know anything about gunfighting, but this set standard, everything being the same, didn't seem right. So I went home to visit my folks, and my dad was a veteran of World War II. He was at Iwo Jima along with a lot of other places. And I made the statement to him, Dad, I wish I could talk to somebody who had been in a gunfight. He didn't even look away from the television. He said, son, go down to the Legion Hall. There's lots of them. So off I've been to the Legion Hall. And you've been by. You've been down there it's right next to Bullwinkle's. So I went down there and I told some guys in the bar what I was interested in, and they kind of laughed at me and called me cop kid. I ended up sitting at the bar of a veteran of World War I, who was probably about my age at the time. And with tears in his eyes and his hand on a beer that was shaking, he started to tell me what it was like to fight in the trenches and the tunnels of World War I. And I can remember leaving that little interview thinking, holy crap, I'm not ready for anything like that. Now, law enforcement's not like that. But let's face it, a gunfight or any physical confrontation, it's seldom what we think it's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to be adaptive, which is something that I take from you, but is absolutely true. You have to be able to adapt based on the circumstances. All you can hope to learn from a course are skill sets, but the hardest part is applying those skill sets to the situation at hand and choosing the right skill set in the right situation. That's why it's a dangerous prospect for someone to assume that they really know what they're doing just because they have a concealed carry permit, for instance. It's great that they took it upon themselves to exercise their Second Amendment right and get that concealed carry permit or open or constitutional carry, whatever it is. But with that should come training. Otherwise, you're putting yourself at an extreme disadvantage.
Well, you make the point that the important thing is to adapt. And all adapt means is to change as necessary. That's not the problem, however. It's being adaptive. And that is the ability to change as necessary. And that ability comes through training, practical experience, your background, and a lot of things that you don't get taking a class or two. And through my law enforcement career, I found that time and time again. Now, I interviewed hundreds of people over the years. I just interviewed a guy here just not too long ago, was a ranger that served in Afghanistan. We sat down and had a beer together and he talked. So it's been going on now for 45, 46 years. I tell you what, the folks that are now watching videos online, that makes it a lot easier. I wished I'd have had that ability to do that when I started out, but I wouldn't change it for anything in the world because the videos are not the same as sitting down with the person and have them tell you what they saw, what they felt, what, the aftermath and all that kind of stuff. And that's been a real education to me. And then along the way in my law enforcement career, I saw things that happened that were not the way I was told they were going to be or the way I was trained. An example that comes to my mind is multiple targets. We did the El Presidente, 222, reload 222. And the first time I must have been on the street about a week when I walked up on my first group of suspects. And you know what, Rich? They didn't stand three people in line. As I walked up, the first thing they did is they spread out. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, wait a minute, this isn't the way this is supposed to go. Nobody taught me anything about this. So you know what? I did what my gut told me to do. I backed up.
That's probably a good idea.
I backed up so I could keep them in my field of view without having to turn my head and watch each one of them. And at that point, and I was a nobody then. I didn't know anything about any of this, but at that point, I learned that the problem with multiple target engagements was not the order you shot them in or how many rounds you shot into each one of them or whether you pivoted like a tank or you turned your hips or all that other garbage. The biggest problem is knowing you're in a multiple target engagement.
Absolutely. And you got to always assume that that's the case until you can ensure that it was one attacker. That's why it's so important that you scan and all that stuff. And I know that, that you have a lot of opinions on that as well.
Because you can scan and see people there, but are they doing anything that catches your attention, that gives you a clue that they're involved in this? See, there's a whole lot more to it than just range stuff.
Yeah, a lot of times you got, like, I call it the scan kata, right? Where they look left and right and really, really cool, really deliberate movements. But when they're doing that, are they seeing? Or are they just turning their head to look in a particular direction?
Well, I used to do a thing in my classes where I would stand off to the side with a knife in my hand. And you'd be say how many guys went into position Sewell and did all that neat stuff and never saw the knife.
Yeah. They're just posing. It's range theatrics.
Shot. I wasn't going to.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to.
Dave, tell us a little bit about, because I sort of misdirected you, I think. Bring us back to 2010. You are the ILETA, which is the International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association Law Enforcement Trainer of the Year. About that time, boom, Handgun Combatives kicks off. Tell us what that's like.
I was working for the federal government at the time in a contract situation, doing court security, judicial security, and stuff like that. And I wasn't very happy with it. It should have been one of the best retirement jobs in the world, but I don't know how to sugarcoat this. Working for the federal government just sucked. Just saw the way that they do things and the way their employees look down on people, and I was just not real happy with it. Well, the Trainer of the Year award took me by surprise. As a matter of fact, I wasn't even there to receive it. I was trying to kind of save on vacation days, so I was going to go up on the very first day of the training conference, not the welcome, that they do the day before. Well, that's when they gave the award out. So I got a call at my work in the federal court building and said, hey, we want you to know that when you get up here tomorrow, you're going to have to accept the award for the Trainer of the Year. Kind of wish somebody would have given me a little clue. I would have went up to accept that. But it was a huge award. And it's one of the best parts, one of the best things in my professional life. I was very, very honored. I went up there, accepted the award. As a matter of fact, I accepted it right before the donut eating contest. I'm sure you remember that little thing they did for a while.
It's a good thing it wasn't at the same time or nobody would have watched you or get your award.
Yeah, you're probably right. Anyway, it was that award that gave me the courage to actually break out and do Handgun Combatives, because I was convinced that I was too old. I was too far gone. I didn't have a big beard and tattoos and, all the stuff that was kind of in then to make a training company go. But when I got the award and I was kind of miserable, it was actually my wife. She says, well, you've always wondered if you could do it in this training business. You ought to give it a try. She said the house is paid for, the cars are paid for, the weddings are paid for. So we didn't really owe anybody anything except those things that you owe until the day you die. She said, give it a try. And if it doesn't work out, then go work at Walmart or something. So I started, my son-in-law and my son helped me with all the computer stuff and the social media things, which I didn't even know what a Facebook or an Instagram was at that point. I knew nothing about any of that stuff. They hooked me up with all of that. And I started looking for hosts, and it launched almost instantly. I mean, I was actually amazed at how people ask me all the time, how do I get into that training business? I don't know. It's like getting into writing. I didn't know how to do that either. That was handed to me. So it took off, and it never really slowed down. It just got bigger and bigger. And you made the comment about how I was hoping to do a class a month. That lasted about 3 months. And then I got to the point where people would ask me, and I was afraid to turn them down, because if I turn these people down, they're not going to ask me again. So I started taking everything that came along, and then it started being 3 and 4 weekends a month from February to November. And then during the weeks, there were law enforcement classes or contract classes. And, it started being 30, 35 weekends a year, 40 classes a year, getting on an airplane on Friday, getting back home on Monday. My wife had asked me not to do the route thing that a lot of the guys do, where they get in the truck and they go out for 2 or 3 weeks at a time and hit a bunch of classes and come back home. She wanted me to come back home. So I probably did a lot more travel than I had to, but that was the promise I made. But it finally did burn me out.
Yeah. And then what's it been, about a year and a half or so since you stopped Handgun Combatives?
I shut down Handgun Combatives 2 years ago, last October.
And I know that the viewers and listeners are going to be wondering, are you still teaching? And I'll just say, he does
Only
teach.
Rich Nance gets me to do it.
He does teach, but it's got to be fun, and it's kind of on his terms. So we have, Dave, you and I have a couple classes. We don't need to get into a lot of it because they're full, but we have a class coming up in February in Arizona here, and that's going to involve a trip to Tombstone, which is a ton of fun. And then we're teaching up in your neck of the woods in Ohio later in the year. So other than that, people, just got to look. And when you see that there's a Dave Spaulding course, you never know when is going to be the final retirement. So sign up.
The thing is, I enjoyed doing the teaching. The running the business and the travels finally went me down. I'm not sorry I shut it down. Not a bit. Am I going to quit teaching? I never said I was going to quit teaching. I said I was going to retire. I probably should have said I'm shutting down my business. But yeah, you asked me this past year, hey, let's go out and do a couple classes. And I thought, yeah, that'd be fun, because, that's just it. We have fun when we do it, Rich. It's not work.
Yeah, that's absolutely got to be part of it. And as a student, you got to be having fun, because if it's miserable and you're, it's boot camp style, only very few students are going to thrive in that environment. So what we want to do, we want something that's inclusive, that, you got to come to us with a little bit of a knowledge. You have to have firearm safety, a firm grasp on firearm safety, and you have to understand the fundamentals. But when you have that and you come with an open mind, you're going to learn a lot.
Well, you and I don't do intro classes. We're not basic level classes, even though we may call them essentials. They're classes for someone that already knows how to run their gun. We're not teaching this is grip, this is trigger, this is how you load the magazine, that stuff's important. But that stuff is probably best handled by the local and regional instructors that are out there. They're the ones that should be doing that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I want to teach fighting. I don't want to teach shooting. And that, as we've talked about this many times, that's harder to do than people realize.
It is, and it's not as measurable, right? It's not necessarily as tangible. And I know you have some really good drills, Dave, because I use those drills, and a lot of them are timed. I'm not bagging on timed drills because it is tangible. It's a way to measure progress. However, there's a lot of things that are vital to surviving a fight, whether it's with or without weapons, that are not as tangible. Can you strike hard? Can you perceive a threat early? These types of things, they're not fun to practice, and they're not as easy to measure. And that makes people default to, well, let's just shoot this drill and see if you can get a sub 1 second draw in an A zone and at 7 yards. Well, that is a skill that you're developing. That's not the way to develop that skill, by the way, but that's a way to determine whether or not you currently possess that skill, right? So then, if you don't get that mark you're aiming for, then you work on it. And how do you work on it? By slowing down, right? By doing things very methodically, by breaking things up. Something that you and I talk about a lot, which is developing that myelination, right? That's how you build skill.
Well, we've entered a time in firearms training where drills have become skills, and that's not the case. Drills should reinforce essential skills. They should be a test of those skills. They should not be the skill themselves. There's been many times somebody say, what do you think of this new drill? And I'll say, well, what does it mean? And the answer is always, well, it reinforces the fundamentals. If that's the only answer you got, I'm going to throw a BS flag. There should be a whole lot more to it than it reinforces. I mean, if you're shooting a gun during the drill, you can say it reinforces the fundamentals, but what skills does it address? My drills, even though you like them and I appreciate that, my drills have never become hugely popular. And the reason for that, Rich, is they're hard, difficult. I mean, a drill should be a test. If you can go out and just knock it down real easy without a whole lot of practice, then what good is it? I think a drill should be doable, but it should be difficult. It should be something you have to work. And you don't practice the drill. You practice the skills that will make the drill a success. And part of working those skills is chunking them together into one fluid motion. It's not just drawing in 1 second. It's maybe drawing in a certain time frame and putting multiple hits on a relatively small target. One of the drills that you really like is that 10 and 8 drill, because that requires you to get a beep. In this case, it could be a beep. In a fight, it would maybe some kind of a body clue that you see. But you move laterally 10, 12 feet, drawing as you move so that when you come to a stop, you're ready to shoot. And then you're going to put 5 rounds into a 3x5 rectangle, which is basically a linear version of the heart and the aorta. So think about everything you're doing there. You're getting that cue or that clue. You're moving laterally. You're clearing your garment. You're drawing your pistol. You're getting it on target before you come to a stop. You're planting. You're working that trigger. You're controlling that recoil. And then you're checking your environment. There's not much going on there, is there?
And that movement, Dave, is dynamic lateral movement. It's not the 1 or 2 lackadaisical steps that you see people teach on the range. And again, I'm not bagging on that. At least they're trying to get their students familiar with the benefit of moving. But your moving, as you like to say, needs to have a purpose. And in this case, that dynamic lateral movement is to get you off line of attack, create enough time to draw your pistol, maybe get you to cover or whatever the case is. With the 10 and 8 drill, Dave, you're also switching from gross motor based in that getting offline, because that has to be done explosively. You're using your legs, you're pushing off. There's technique to it, but it's a gross motor movement. Then you plant and present the pistol, and now you're switching to a fine motor skill, which is to find your sights, press the trigger, and all of that. Yeah, it's harder than it looks. It's harder than it looks, but it takes practice, and that's the kind of skill that you're going to need. That's probably going to be much more realistic of a scenario than just drawing and shooting at a stationary target like we tend to do at the range.
And that's where the timer comes in, because we give you 8 seconds to do all of that, which means you can't do that movement lackadaisical. You've got to do it explosively, dynamically, whatever word you want. Then you got to plant, you got to get on target, or you're not going to make that time frame. And that's where I like timers in combative shooting. I really don't care how fast your splits are. I like to look at the overall time, because the overall time in my drills has been set to make you do things in that explosive, dynamic way. Because combative pistol craft has always been the balance of speed and accuracy. And whether you're more accurate or you're more fast depends on the circumstance you face, and circumstance dictates. We all realize that. So we can't ignore time or speed, but time or speed should never trump accuracy or the ability to hit the target well enough to incapacitate it, because in the end, it's all about stopping the threat.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, Dave. And, this is probably a good time to get into something that you and I are both kind of excited to talk about here. Talk about blending speed with accuracy. One of the things that really helps with that on a pistol is a red dot. And since this is an Aimpoint podcast, I think it is perfectly apropos to bring up that I don't know when this is going to air, but this morning, Aimpoint released the KOA, which is a collaboration with Glock. And so you can only get this new optic right now when you purchase a Glock that has that as part of the package.
Yeah, it's a true collaboration. You've got to have both companies.
Absolutely. And yeah. as a longtime police officer, I know you would agree that, there's a lot of pistols that would get the job done. There's a lot of red dots that would get the job done, but at kind of the top tier, something that you would carry maybe in law enforcement or a military unit, or certainly as a private citizen, is Glock and Aimpoint. Those are two brands that you can trust your life to.
They're both reliable. I mean, they're both, in the case of Glock, it's been around forever. Now, this new optic, it's built by Aimpoint, so we have every reason to believe it's going to be robust, tough, mil spec, whatever.
It is, and it's 7075 T6 aluminum. I think I got that right. It's for they call it an ultra compact sight, so it's for the slim frames and also the normal size Glock 19 type frames and stuff. Now this is smaller than the Acro, but the optic window is the same size. So when you look at it, it almost looks like that dot's just floating there, because the housing is not as thick as on the Acro. This has a very unique mounting system that's patented. And it's called the A-cut. So what it is in layman's terms is you basically insert the front portion of the sight, the foot, into this cutout. And then the back part of the sight comes down. It snaps in. It doesn't really snap in, but it's the same concept as putting a boot into a ski. And then
the rear sight holds it all in place.
You got the rear sight that holds it into place, and that way you have the built-in rear sight. So what is so great about this cut? Well, this cut enables the optic to be mounted lower, so it's deeper into the slide, which is beneficial for a few reasons. First of all, it's going to have a better, it's going to be more secure since it's mounted lower. It doesn't require the use of any plates. Plates can be a pain in the butt because you got to get the right plate. Then are the screws going to be the right length? It becomes very not a good idea. And the higher up you get, the more things that can go wrong structurally, right? So the lower you can mount this directly and low on the slide, the better off you're going to be. It also prevents the optic from sticking up too high, Dave, which can be problematic when you're drawing or whatever else. And finally, since it's sitting so low, it will co-witness with standard height Glock sights, it has a lot going for it. Aside from all that, it has the same type of features you would expect, like from the Acro P2, for instance, enclosed emitter, 3.5 MOA dot, one CR 2032 battery powers it for like 50,000 hours of constant on or something like that. So it's just a great little sight. So if you're interested in Glocks and you're interested in Aimpoints, they just had a baby and you need to check it out.
It's going to be a great model for agencies that want to issue a bunch of guns. They want the optic to be with it. It's going to be perfect for that kind of setup. But what I also like about it is it's an exact fit. I started fooling around with the little red dots on pistols after Kelly McCann talked about it, probably about 1999 or 2000. So I was taking J points and just putting them on a platform that fit into the rear sight dovetail. Well, we learned pretty quickly that it was the slide velocity and the sudden stop that kills those units. I mean, boom, 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 boom. It's hard on them. So they started making them, said, take that. But that abuse is much less when that optic fits squarely in that dovetail, it sits low and it's locked in place. Well, what this new setup has done is it's addressed that. So I have no doubt that this new Aimpoint sight's going to be robust enough, but this specially cut Glock slide is just going to add the service life to it.
Yeah, they say it's tested for 40,000 rounds of 9mm. I got my hands on this, so I've known about this for a bit. Obviously, I got my hands on this in September in Sweden, and I mean it is very intuitive to shoot. So the lockup's cool. All the features that it has are really nice, but what really spoke to me the most was shooting it. And that, I think, is what's going to really make people believers and realize that this isn't just another optic introduction, which happens all the time in the industry.
Well, Bob Radecki, who just the 1st of January, retired from Glock. I was talking to him this morning. Well, not really talking, you message. But I messaged him this morning, and he's going to bring it with him to the class in February.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So there will at least be one of those in attendance for everybody to take a look at. I'm interested in it. I'm gonna look into this. I think it's got a lot of promise.
Yeah, me too, Dave. Hey, where can people go? I know you're not really actively teaching these days, but where can people go to find out more information about what you have going on? I know, for instance, you just did something with Panteo Productions with some other well-known firearms instructor, stuff like that. So if someone wants to learn more about your doctrine and what you have coming up, where can they go?
Well, we kept the Handgun Combatives Facebook, the business Facebook page up. My son-in-law, Darren, pretty much runs that. I still chime in here and there, but I don't really, unless I have something to say, I really don't look at it too much. But that's pretty much where I operate from. That's where I posted the classes that we're doing. That's where I put up videos or commentary or things like that. There's also the Handgun Combatives alumni page, which you have to be a graduate of one of the classes. And I'll post stuff there. But that's pretty much it. I don't really consider myself a public figure like I once did. I still like to stay involved, like the Panteo videos, doing a class here and there, or maybe doing a video. Darren's kept the Handgun Combatives YouTube channel up. So when we get together and do a video, we still put the stuff up there, but it's still under all the Handgun Combative stuff.
Very cool. Well, thanks a lot for joining us today, Dave. All right, guys, that's a wrap with this episode with Dave Spaulding. If it resonated with you, be sure and let us know in the comments. And also don't forget to like and subscribe to the Aimpoint Taking Aim podcast. We'll see you next time.